Tonight, a White House in crisis and our allies losing faith in America. Washington Post op-ed columnist Dana Milbank joins to discuss all the chaos. His latest column, it says it all. The headline, the world is staring at Trump, mouth agape. Also, it looks like Trump's base will stick with him no matter what. But what about the rest of the country? We'll explore where the line is and whether or not we may have crossed it. Then, after a long week with lots of depressing news, we're going to lighten things up with a preview of Game 5 for the ALCS at Yankee Stadium. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. We begin tonight with a White House, as I said, and you can only describe it this way, in full-out crisis. And a huge question that I wish I didn't have to ask. Have we crossed the Rubicon with this president, and is there no looking back? Let us recap what has happened just over the past few days and kick things off with something that's so egregious. If anyone else were president, we'd think it was all a joke. Here, President Trump adamantly denying something his chief of staff just admitted.
There was no quid pro quo at all.
There is no pro quo.
There was no quid pro quo.
There was no quid pro quo, unlike Biden.
There was no quid pro quo. There was nothing.
You can say the phrase. I'm not sure he necessarily knows what it means. Certainly he's not on the same page with his chief of staff. Mick Mulvaney did not get that memo. Here is the acting chief of staff at the podium yesterday.
What you just described is a quid pro quo. It is funding will not flow unless the investigation into the Democratic server happens as well.
We do that all the time with foreign policy. Get over it. There's going to be political influence in foreign policy.
Okay, even though we saw that on live TV with our own eyes and we heard it with our own ears again on live TV, Mulvaney insults the global intelligence by putting this statement out just a couple of hours later when the blowback came back in a gale force wind. Once again, the media has decided to misconstrue my comments to advance a biased and political witch hunt against President Trump. Let me be clear. There was absolutely no quid pro quo between Ukrainian military aid and any investigation into the 2016 election. And may I insert, you'd never heard what I said on live TV. Okay, as they say, you can't make this stuff up. He's actually blaming the media for something covering live that he said on television. Now, after Mulvaney did something we don't usually hear from a Trump official, telling the truth, the administration went into full damage control mode. Justice Department saying they have no idea what Mulvaney was talking about. Trump's own attorney saying they were not involved with his disastrous press conference. Then there's the impeachment inquiry, which is chugging right along. Just a reminder, the tipping point for Nancy Pelosi on impeachment was the quid pro quo over Ukraine. So this week, we have seen a conga line of current and former administration officials testifying that the whistleblower was right. There was a quid pro quo. And we had more hearings that we know are coming down the pike. Then, of course, the situation in Syria. By now, we know the gruesome details. President abruptly pulls our troops out of northern Syria, abandoning in the wake our allies, the Kurds, ignoring the advice from the national security apparatus that had other options, and in the process creating a vacuum that bad actors like Assad, Putin, Iran will now fill. Then he declares victory after a supposed ceasefire was agreed to yesterday, even though he created the crisis and the ceasefire is tenuous at best. He also gives Turkey everything they wanted. The situation's so bad, American soldiers are saying they're embarrassed to wear the uniform for the very first time. Then there's the ridiculous letter that our president sent to the Turkish President Erdogan. By the way, Erdogan, by first-hand accounts, when he got the letter, threw it away. I want to read a portion of what the president on White House letterhead sent to another foreign leader. Quote, you don't want to be responsible for slaughtering thousands of people, and I don't want to be responsible for destroying the Kurdish economy. Going on. History will look upon you favorably if you get this done the right way, humane way. It will look upon you forever as the devil if good things don't happen. Don't be a tough guy. Don't be a fool. Again, the United States and Turkey, we're groveling to them somehow this whole world is turned upside down. Then there was the White House meeting between Trump and congressional leaders. This picture tells the story. Speaker Pelosi saying the president had a meltdown. Times reported on just some of the details. Pelosi, all roads with you lead to Putin. I hate ISIS more than you do, the president declared. You don't know that, the speaker replied. You're just a politician, Trump said to Pelosi, to which she responded, sometimes I wish you were. Schumer interjected, telling Mr. Trump that name-calling wasn't necessary. Is that a bad name, Chuck? Trump asked. Then he turned to Pelosi. You're not a politician, you're a third-grade politician. Now, my first guest tonight is perfect to discuss all the chaos. His latest piece in the Washington Post is called The World is Staring at Trump, Mouth Agape. Dana Milbank joins us now. As I said, op-ed columnist covering national politics for the Post. You wrote the piece Wednesday, and since you penned that article, we've had the letter the president sent to Erdogan. You've got Mulvaney saying, yes, there was a quid pro quo, then attempting to say he never said it. And, oh, by the way, we're going to have the G7 at Trump's resort in Florida. I think that's the best metaphor for how this daily fire hose we've somehow gotten used to.
Yeah, Richard. I mean, we often say, the wheels have come off, it's off the track, but of course that happened a long time ago. So now it's just, sort of a constant stream of crazy. There does seem to be even more now that it gets a sense that the White House doesn't have a particular strategy, that's just sort of firing in all directions, not clear what the message is or what the message will be an hour from now or a day from now. But it seemed like Mulvaney was realizing you can't say no quid pro quo when there's now plenty of evidence of this. So the idea is, presumably, to get out in front of it and to say, well, we said there was a quid pro quo and there's nothing wrong with that. So if there's a strategy to it, it's that, but it mostly just looks like a whole lot of flailing and firing in all directions.
I don't know how to best articulate this, but for the last 3 years, people have been angry, they've been embarrassed by things that have happened, but it seemed to have a turn with Syria maybe being the fulcrum that people were disgraced. They were, and I saw the McCraven piece, which I know you did as well, and again, the former commander of United States Special Ops, he said, if our promises are meaningless, how will our allies ever trust us? If we can't have faith in our nation's principles, why would the men and women of this nation join the military? And if they don't join, who will protect us? If we are not the champions of the good and the right, then who will follow us? And if no one follows us, where will the world end up? President Trump seems to believe that these qualities are unimportant or show weakness. He is wrong. These are the virtues that have sustained this nation for the past 243 years. If we hope to continue to lead the world and inspire a new generation of young men and women to our cause, then we must embrace these values now more than ever. The former retired Navy admiral went on to say that men and women of all political persuasions have seen the assaults on our institutions, on the intelligence and law enforcement community, the State Department, and the press. They have seen our leaders stand beside despots and strongmen, preferring their government narrative to our own. They have seen us abandon our allies and have heard the shouts of betrayal from the battlefield. As I stood on the parade field at Fort Bragg, one retired four-star general grabbed my arm, shook me, and shouted, "I don't like the Democrats, but Trump is destroying the Republic." Is it just maybe my perception, but it seems that people have had enough. Now, whether that changes a single vote in the Senate, if it ever gets there, I have no idea. But something seemed to have changed this past week.
Well, it depends on which people we're talking about. There's still a core of Trump support out there, and there's a core of people who didn't like him, a much larger group that didn't like him to start with. I think the difference you're seeing now is with Syria. For the first time, you're really having some Republican unease because it involves the military, because it's causing so much grief in the military, because it goes against so much of what a conservative foreign policy has been forever. whatsoever. And you're right, that doesn't necessarily mean they will turn against the president in impeachment or anything else. But, you know, at the very least, you could see in the House vote this week just a lopsided number rebuking the president's actions in Syria. So I think that is something different. It may not amount to a hill of beans, though.
But you're closer to this than I am. Is there a sense that not just how wounded he'll be from next November, there are people concerned between now and then, forget about the unfitness, there's a concern about what he might do, permanent scars here, internationally, about major consequences of things he could do. I've seen folks talk about that there's an urgency to do something now.
Well, there's a lot of people feel that way. I mean, the question is, what can you do, particularly if there's a Senate that would not remove the president from office, regardless of what the House decides to do. I think a lot of the angst is overseas. You see the United States essentially betraying a strong ally who has been quite faithful over time, just happening over one phone call. So I think you're seeing a lot of jitters among allies, whether they're NATO allies, trading partners, others around the world who are concerned about just what calamity the president might unleash intentionally or otherwise. You know, we've already sort of been on guard for not knowing exactly what he's going to do from one moment to the next. But of course, the president of the United States and the commander-in-chief has an awful lot of power for good or for ill.
You know, I saw Lindsey Graham was caught in the hallway yesterday, and he hadn't heard, but was relayed what Mulvaney said in the press conference, basically acknowledging the quid pro quo. And maybe I'm reading into it too much at this point, and God knows he's abetted at least many things the president's done the last 3 years. He just said, I have no idea what to say. And he proceeded to continue to walk. You've seen former Senator Flake say that if they could do this anonymously, there'd be 35 Republican senators voting right now to impeach the president. Where do you think, with all the political calculations, et cetera, with just what we know, if it got to the Senate, how many Republicans would actually say, yes, this guy needs to go?
Well, the way it looks now, maybe you'd have a couple. You might have Susan Collins, you might have Cory Gardner. They're vulnerable in elections. I think the timing, Richard, is going to be quite important here because we're still somewhat in primary season when Republicans fear that a challenger either in the race or could get in the race and knock them out if they go against the president. The later it gets in the season, the more of them will be past primaries. This is true in the House, but would conceivably be true in the Senate as well. So I think the longer it goes on, the freer they will be. On the other hand, it doesn't look like it's in the Democrats' interest to sort of drag this out. Might as well strike while the iron is hot.
And finally, Dana, I know there's no such things as voices of God anymore. No one's going to. People are in their respective corners, and no anchor whatsoever is going to change their mind. But you saw what Mattis said at the Al Smith dinner last night, albeit tongue-in-cheek. For him, that was still something. There's a debate I've heard as to whether or not he says he's going to talk when the time is right. Given what is going on the ground in Syria, given what we know is happening and has been reported behind the walls in the Oval, has that time come? I understand and I respect, the oath he took, and he wants to do this in a measured way. But isn't his perspective on this long overdue?
I think that, yes, long overdue. I think that time has come and gone. It would not hurt to have him out there. We've seen this sort of quiet grumbling from a whole panoply of former Trump cabinet officials, White House staffers, constantly being careful, though. Yes, you would think that if General Mattis, he resigned over this Syria issue, it's hard to see what's holding him back from stating things further, other than this, not wishing to be targeted and dragged through the muck by the president, and he's shown a willingness to do that.
Dana Milbank with the Washington Post. Dana, thank you so much.
All right. Sure thing, Richard.
All right, everybody, when we come back, we discussed how crazy things are at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue, but where is the line for people when it comes to actually giving up on the president? Now, I'm not talking about the hardcore base wearing the red MAGA hats. They're never going to flip. We're going to take a look at the other two-thirds of this country. Yes, there is the Democrats that wanted him out before he even stepped in the office, but what about those people there that may have voted for the president last time but are on the fence this time? Is there anything? Where is their line to finally say enough is enough?